the question that I wanted to ask everybody before we wrap up for the day was, why do you think the Tudors have this hold over us? And what I've found interesting just in the past couple of months as I'm getting ready for my book to go on sale is that I've seen a whole bunch of Tudor books come out in the last 2 years, and there are a whole bunch more coming out soon. And usually it was like you'd have one or two here and there, and but I feel like there's this sort of bigger push right now. There's a lot that's coming in and being produced that is about these stories right now. And I have my own theory about why that might be, that there are some parallels between now and then that are inspiring brains to think about how we are, living through history again and maybe not learning from it. But I would love to know, I'll kind of popcorn around to everybody and just see, why you think the Tudors, why they captured your imagination, and why you think they're such enduring figures, and some of the figures that we spend the most of our art on out of any characters in history. So let's see who I'll kind of go backwards. I know Jennifer had to drop off for a second. So Rebecca, why don't you tell us how do you get the Anne bug, and why do you think it has stuck around for so long?
I think for me, a big part of it is that Anne Boleyn, um, who seems so obviously wronged in history, is an example of this extremely intelligent, extremely powerful, savvy woman who rises to a certain level of power and is then punished for that power. I know you mentioned Jill, like echoes into the present day, and I think that that's a story that as contemporary people and as contemporary women, we can all look at and recognize and maybe think of examples from politics or public arts or even our own personal lives of women we know who have had similar experiences. I also think that Anne was a woman who just kind of like refused to conform to gender expectations of her time, or maybe was incapable of doing so. And by that, I mean that she was like just kind of seemed constitutionally incapable of being submissive and obedient and quiet and doing things that maybe would have been self-preserving. But um, although it's 500 years later and gender expectations are very different, women still feel a lot of pressure to be all of those things and to take up less space and to make themselves smaller. And she's a little bit of like a radical badass figure in that way. That's definitely something that drew me to her.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Karen, what about you?
Oh, I agree with everything that Rebecca said. The thing is with Anne is she was like, my most recent book, A Defiant Woman, she was very defiant. And she really didn't care. She said what she meant, and that wasn't, what society really expected of women back then. Um, when I was, getting into her head and her voice when I was writing, I started thinking, women today are the same way. We're still sort of put down, and you still have to have a different, you know, you're looked at differently in the business world than a man is. I mean, women are still getting paid less than men get paid. I mean, here we are, in 2026, and women are still getting paid less than men are for the same job. And somebody like Anne, she spoke up, and one of the things that I really got into was, I have a Tom Cromwell character, and he really was a real instigator for her downfall, because she wanted to give the money from the monasteries to the poor, and he just wanted it to all go to Henry. And that he really orchestrated her fall as well. And Henry was sort of on board with it too, because he was tired of her by then. But part of me wonders, if Cromwell hadn't really pushed it so much and created this whole, lie that she was having these affairs with all of these men, would Henry have come around? Because he did later with Catherine Parr. She was able to talk her way out of getting arrested. And it's possible. And I actually found my Catherine Parr character and my Anne Boleyn character actually meet in A Defiant Woman. And as I was writing about this meeting, I was thinking, they were both very much the same kind of woman, very intelligent, very educated, very fun loving. And I felt like they could actually be friends. And I started thinking about how Catherine really saved herself from being arrested and possibly facing the same fate that Anne had. And I started wondering, well, could Anne have done that? If Cromwell hadn't been really orchestrating this whole conspiracy against her. One of my favorite characters that sort of snuck into A Defiant Woman is I Have Thomas Wyatt. And he's a private investigator that she hires because Elizabeth has been kidnapped. And they start a relationship, and I was like, oh wow, I love him. So I use a lot of secondary characters in these books that are really fun. You don't really have to know about the Tudors to read my books, but I have a lot of Easter eggs for people, and like Laura was talking about Jane Boleyn, she's actually my Catherine Howard character in An Inconvenient Wife. She's actually Caitlin Howard's publicist, because Caitlin is an actress. So and she sort of gets Caitlin together with Culpepper, who is the new James Bond. And it's I have a lot of little fun things like that throughout the books, that it's really been a great fun. And actually, I don't really get into Jane Seymour. I'm sorry about that, Janet. She's dead.
She's dead in my book too. I feel so bad.
I know, I feel bad too, but I had too many wives. I was like, how many can I juggle? But in the next book that I'm working on, I actually have a lot of Mary Tudor and Lady Jane Grey. So I've brought them into, Jane is actually turning out to be fairly interesting. So it's really, really fun. And I think that everybody's interest in the Tudors is just, these were really, really interesting people. They just, there was nothing boring about the Tudor period at all. And, and you can see it now. I mean, we've got 6 on Broadway, and, everybody's books and retellings. And it's sort of an interesting phenomenon. And I kind of wonder what they would have thought about their legacies. Would they have thought that they would have been remembered 500 years later?
I love that. Henry. Yeah. Oh, Henry for sure thought he's like, people will remember me forever. But we're remembering you for different things than you thought, Henry. Like, it's not the rosy picture you probably wanted to leave behind. Oh man. Well, Clemmy,
when you kill 2 wives, what are you gonna
Right, exactly. Yeah. Clemmy, what do you think? What started your fascination with this period? And
Oh
you
my
went, because
God.
you're earlier than a lot of us. A lot of us are, really in that Anne or after Anne time. So you're one of the earlier ones. So you are meeting some different people than we probably talk about a lot.
Yeah, exactly. I'm meeting earlier people, and it's very interesting actually, because I wanted to show that Henry from 1510, back when nothing had made him unleash the beast. But still, it was still very dramatic. I mean, when you think about one of his first acts as king was to order the beheading of his father's 2 ministers. Like, it starts with blood. It's always been bloody. And I think why we love the Tudors so much today is that I think it's just the drama. It's the sheer drama of it all. It's everyone is marrying each other. Everyone is betraying each other. People are being executed, beheaded, burned. There's wars. There's princesses. It glitters, and then at the same time, there's blood everywhere. Like, it is dramatic, and I think this is why we love it so much. And sure, we can try to draw parallels between then and now, I'm going to say it's a bit of a slippery slope, but because I don't think their world was very relatable. And that's also why I wrote my books. That's why I used time travel as a means to an end for my character to have to adapt and have to try to understand them and the society and meet the people behind, beneath everything. Because I don't think they're very relatable. They lived in such a different society, but still very dramatic. And I think we're just drawn to drama as human beings. We all love drama, especially when we're not involved in it. Just other people's drama is just fantastic. And yeah, it glistens and it's dangerous and it's sexy and that's all you need really. Which is also why sometimes I wonder why some TV shows, I'm not going to name them, some books, TV shows, movies, they add that layer of drama, which is totally unnecessary. Like, have you seen their lives? This is plenty. This is enough.
Truly it is. I feel like when I was writing, I had to keep scaling back because I was like, oh, I want to add this like weird side quest and this person that did this insane thing and like all these problems that happened. And it's like, you can't, I mean, you'd have to have a shelf this long to capture everything that
Exactly.
those
Just
folks did.
focus.
Yes. All right, Janet, what about you? What gave you the Tudor itch in the beginning? And obviously we talked a little bit about, changing gears, but you were Anne for 40 years, it sounds like, before becoming Team Jane.
I was Team Anne since I was allowed to stay up late to watch The Six Wives of Henry VIII with Keith Mitchell on TV, and that was just it. I mean, to me, the Tudors have always had not only the drama that Clemmy was talking about, but the stakes at a huge level, and also the narrative arc built into every single one of the stories. We see people go from bottom to top and back down to bottom, or top to bottom and back up to top. I mean, those kind of reversals, that the stories exist, which almost makes it harder for a fiction author to not just rely on telling the stories, but to find the interior changes that the characters go through. Because to a certain extent, you could just put it down on the paper. This is what happened, and the stories are there. And I think we've been reacting to that for forever.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it's so true. And Jody, what about you? Especially, from the lens of the I'll call them girls because they were young girls at that time, that had terrible fates that you got to rewrite. Like, does that feel like your own vigilante justice?
Yeah, absolutely. Like who doesn't hear about Jane Grey's story and think, gosh, that is so terrible. Somebody should really do something. And I mean, it's too late, obviously, unless, you can time travel, in which case maybe there's a chance there. But, that's giving her a funnier story, a happier ending, a romance, just feels like a nice thing to do for somebody who did not get that. Somebody who is very cool and smart and had a lot of convictions and not a lot of autonomy.
Yeah. And I think we probably would all agree would have made a pretty good queen if given the opportunity, especially compared to some of the other folks in her family. So,
Yeah.
oh, Jane, if only. And then Laura, we'll end with you. What got you started in this time period, and especially again looking at George and Jane and telling stories fresh and anew.
I think I think there's a kind of saying that I'm using quite a lot in my illustration work at the moment, which is always been there, always will be. And I think that resonation, when I first read about Jane Boleyn, it wasn't long after I'd just been diagnosed with OCD myself. So I think seeing that there'd always been people that had had struggles with their mental health, and I think similarly with George, even though it's more of a kind of symbolic thing than a historical fact, I think knowing like just there definitely were LGBTQIA plus people at Henry's court. There will have been people that felt that way. Um, and kind of, I find it really interesting to think how people have like court is such a microcosm of society, isn't it? The court they lived in, it's kind of everything that we live in, but they're all rammed together in one tiny space. And I think that magnifies all the interpersonal relationships and all the drama, and I think that's one of the things that really draws us to it. And it's looking at like how would you have navigated that space when everything was so publicly on show? If you were one of these wealthy families, if you're at court, if you're a courtier, it's kind of like your whole life was you had to be on public show all the time. And then if you were carrying something, like if you were carrying like a disability or a different sexual identity or something like that, I find it so interesting to know how these people manage to hold that with their like public life and their private life. And yeah, I think it's really interesting. And I think somebody else said, like, it might have been Clemmy, that like you couldn't write some of these people. Like someone that we have in our play is Francis Bryan, and I think he is definitely one of those people that you're like, you could not write this character. Like, he's called the Vicar of Hell, he loses an eye and wears
His
an
eye
eye
patch.
like, yeah, the material's right there. I'm like, why haven't we had like a whole series on Francis Bryan? He's just sat there waiting for it. And Thomas Wyatt as well. Yeah, I love Thomas Wyatt. I think a lot of people do. I think maybe because his writing gives us I think we have a bit more of a direct insight into his mind and his thoughts because his body of work has survived. I think that's so special because it kind of really opens up the window.
Yeah. Well, and when you were saying like the idea of people being at court together, it made me think like really it was high school for them all the time. You're trapped with the same people. It's dramatic. Who's dating who? Who's like been caught kissing who? They're all drinking all the time too. So like add it up here, and there's always the chance that like you do the wrong thing and you're not just socially exiled, you're exiled. So the stakes, the drama, all of it in these tight, close quarters with all of these people that are vying for power, position, money, favors. I would be dead in days. I would not. That should have been my question. Who would survive, in the Tudor court? Probably not a one of us, which I think is maybe a good thing. I think we're all the type of women who'd get killed pretty quickly. So, but all right. Well, I think that is our time for the day. And I just want to thank all of you guys so much for coming and joining us and talking about Anne Boleyn. Tuesday, again, is the 490th anniversary of her death. And I think it's a beautiful thing that we had, throughout the day today, 14 people come and talk about why this family, why this person deserves better. We have done better for her in our writing and in our work. And I think we can just keep applying that to all the women who have been wronged in the past, all the people that have been wronged in the past. We have probably more work to do. All of us should log off now and go start writing, because I'm sure somebody got an idea from someone in this panel the entire time.